Hello, everyone. Welcome to this video. Hope you're having just a fabulous day. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be highlighting some things that I believe you need to know if you want to invest in comic books. So, my name is Vince Vaughn, and I'm with Really Bad. Actually, my handle's Really Bad Comics on Instagram. And today I'm going to do a reaction video to one of my favorite comic book creators, who happens to be Mickey from Swaggle House. So Mickey did a video a few years ago, and honestly, it's still relevant today. He saw an article online that outlines advice given by Warren Buffett for investors in general. And Mickey did his best to try to translate that article into an investment strategy for comic books. He brings up a lot of ideas that really allow me to highlight how I look at investing in comic books. Differently than most, I suppose. So in this video, he goes through 5 things he learned from the article. And honestly, we'll just let him tell you about it and I'll respond. Off we go.
Know the difference between price and value. Know the difference between price and value. Okay, so this is a really cool thing. Maybe the most important one of the batch. Know the difference between price and value. Well, what does he mean by this? Well, what Warren was kind of getting at in saying this is that, like the stock market, like in comic books, prices are never stagnant. They're always going up and down. They're always inflating and moving and yo-yoing up and down, depending on what is going on in the market, how it's moving, depending on what's going on surrounding, the cultural aspect of the market or the news within regards to the market. So one thing that you have to remember is when you're pursuing a certain book, you have to know the difference between the price of the book and the value of the book, because there could be a hot book out in the market. Let's, say Silver Surfer #1, and if you go to resources like Key Collector or Go Collect or, any place that has like a, comic pricing guide or whatever, they'll have what they consider fair market values for those books. So let's say, a certain book is $100 fair market value. Well, there's that aspect to it, which is like, this is what, the market has determined as a, what the going rate should be for this book. Now, with that being said, if you were to go to eBay and find, that book online, the price, the actual, number that you would have to commit in order to attain that book may not be $100. It may be, fluctuating. It may be like 110, 120, 130, could be really, really high for that given day. So there is a difference between value and price. And when you are pursuing a book or you're looking to acquire something, it's really important to understand the value so that you don't get it at a price that is more than the value, because you never want to like buy something that is, over the value, and then you're sort of like left in the hole when you're holding onto the book. So that is something that's really important to understand before you ever, commit to buying a comic that you're after. Understand the value, because you want to make sure that the value and the price are pretty close before you pull the trigger. All right.
Okay. So I don't know how to do this stuff. I'm still learning. Okay. Know the difference between price and value. Okay. I mean, this is a great point. But I think to understand how I look at it differently, I think I really need to get you to understand value as it relates to comic books and how it's different than value as it relates to companies. So, comic books. Earlier this year, I purchased a copy of Batman 232. It features the first appearance of Ra's al Ghul. I bought it rated at a 9.8 on the CGC scale. Only 70 exist on the census. No newsstand editions exist, thankfully. I paid $9,900 for that book. Now imagine my chagrin when I found out that book has since had 2 recent sales for around $8,000. Now, before I bought that book, I checked Go Collect, my guide of choice. It said $10K is the fair market value for that book. And, for me, when I buy a book, I don't need a shitload of equity. I would like a little, obviously. I found the book on Reese's Rare Comics. And it was for like around $11K. I made an offer for $9,900. Before I knew it, I was a proud owner. Since then, I checked GPA analysis even after I bought that book, and I was delighted to find out that I'm not the highest payer in history for that book, as one sold after I bought mine for $10,800. But regardless, according to the current fair market value, because that thing sold recently for around $8,000, according to Go Collect, I overpaid for that book as it stands now. But I'm a buy and hold guy. So I'm not looking to sell that book right away. So in 5 years, is it going to matter? I'm not an active seller like of either stocks, comic books. And I believe in 5 years, that book is going to be well north of what I paid for. I certainly don't believe that book's going to bottom out like at a 9.8. But here's the thing. It might. And I'll be left holding the bag because, in my opinion, value of comic books is nothing like value of companies. The value of a comic book to me is similar to Bitcoin, or some kind of cryptocurrency, because it's based largely on how much it sold for recently. And the way Buffett uses this advice is that he wants to know the value of the company before he agrees to a price. So, what he'll do is he'll talk to the company before he makes a purchase. I mean, he'll value companies with strong revenues, yes, but he also considers the people who manage the company actually more valuable than the company itself. So, what does this mean for you? You can do all your due diligence on understanding price and value, and you can still lose your ass. I mean, we're dealing with funny books here, okay? We're not dealing with companies. So that's my take. Moving on.
That being said, let us move on to tip number 2. And tip number 2 is going to be investing isn't rocket science, but there is no easy button. Investing isn't rocket science, but there is no easy button. Apparently, I can't talk right now. Okay, so what did Warren mean by that? Well, he was saying that, at the end of the day, there's really no correlation to, being, some super genius and being successful in the stock market. It's really just sort of about like understanding the market, paying attention to the news, paying attention to the trends. And I think that, that sort of goes with comic books, just sort of if you pay attention to the news, pay attention to the trends. You look at what's going on in the market as far as like the MCU and how that has an effect on the books and how that moves their prices. I mean, you, like anyone else, can be very successful for specking on books. I mean, I'm someone who talks about spec books and talks with you guys about what are the hot comics, but I'm just a guy who loves the hobby. I don't have any more information or access to information than you guys have. I just sort of read the news and think about what storylines could be coming to the MCU and what characters could be related to that. And I watch other contributors to the hobby and the community, and I just understand what's going on. And for that reason, I've been very successful with acquiring spec books that have actually panned out for me. So again, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to spec on books within the comic book market, but there is no easy button. It just takes a little bit of work and paying attention to what people are saying and what is going on. All right, let's move on to tip.
Okay, so investing isn't rocket science. No, it's not. But there is no easy button, and there isn't. If you're buying comic books based on what's coming, what might be released in the MCU or the DCU, as the case may be, you're not investing. You're speculating. And I think it's important to highlight this difference. But before we do that, let's get this out of the way. Warren Buffett would in no way advise anyone to buy comics as an investment. They aren't at all like stocks. And as I mentioned before, they're really more like Bitcoin or cryptocurrency. And Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, from Berkshire Hathaway, they would never advise anyone to buy crypto for that matter. They would probably say that if investing in comic books was such a good idea, Berkshire would do it. And they'd sell fractional shares of it to their investors, and they don't. Now, having said that, lots of people buy Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. I think Bitcoin, last I checked, was up around 104,000. I mean, Mickey here, he says he's good at buying spec books. And presumably these are books that he's guessed who's going to be the new thing in the MCU. Like I remember, if you watch Daredevil Born Again, White Tiger was a character. And people, for that episode, everyone was talking about White Tiger. If you bought White Tiger beforehand and you decided you were going to sell it at the day that the White Tiger guy was in Daredevil Born Again, you got lucky. Unless you're in the entertainment business, and he is actually. So it's very possible he gets wind of some things that you and I don't. This might be if he does something like that, it might be the equivalent of speculating with, a cryptocurrency like XRP or ADA, if you've ever heard of them. I personally, I would have liked to have heard him talk about some of the books he spec'd on. We could judge for ourselves if he's as good as he thinks he is. But I think that highlights the distinction between speculation and investing. So key issues from the Silver Age, in my opinion, are not speculation. Now, may they go up and down? Yeah, sure, of course. But, almost every modern age book is a speculation, in my opinion. Case in point, take something like what's probably one of the hottest books out there, Something is Killing the Children. And let's say it's at a 9.8. I don't know. What will that thing be worth in 5 years? There's no rarity today for modern age books, with maybe a few exceptions. So there's built-in rarity and huge demand at the higher grades for Silver Age and Golden Age books. That's an investment because you've got a guaranteed history of returns on that book, and you can believe with some certainty that that's going to produce a return at some point as well. So, Amazing Spider-Man 50, buying that book, it doesn't require rocket science to know it's most likely going to produce a return in the future. But investors like me could fuck up that advice and buy it for $50,000. Hence the no easy button comment. But it quickly becomes something like rocket science when we move into speculation and you're trying to figure out what's going to be the hot book in a year, 2 years, 3 years. As an example. Okay. Next Buffett tip. All right.
Number 3 now. And tip number 3 is going to be the best moves are usually boring. The best moves are usually boring. Okay, so what do I mean by this? Well, this is something that's interesting because, when Warren was saying in terms of stock investing, sometimes the best moves as far as an investment and return on your money are concerned is, investing in things that aren't very sexy. It's not always going for that hot startup company or that very, very cool, entertainment company, like a video game company or something that's, more fun. Sometimes it's about getting that boring, manufacturer that makes toothbrushes or something that's, really, really mundane. And this is kind of a cool tip as it relates to the comic book collecting stuff, because, I think every week we get new hot books that come out, right? Like there's new, like, oh, new Donny Cates, new Venom, new Star Wars, new Thor, new King in Black, and those, I would sort of equate to the like sexy picks and the sexy stocks that come out week after week after week. But what Warren is saying here is, sometimes the best investments are the ones that aren't necessarily the hot books, but the ones that are just sort of known products. Like, instead of flocking to The Last Ronin or all the getting all the King in Black stuff, you may just be better off like buying something that already has value within the community. Maybe it's a book that's 5 years old or 3 years old or 20 years old, but it's the same monetary value as like the new stuff. It's just not as like hot of an item. So what Warren was saying here is sometimes the best investments are boring. Now, disclaimer, buy whatever you want. I mean, if you want to pursue a book. But if we're talking about it for, economic reasons and investing and return on your investment, that might be something that is better to go after the boring thing than the hot thing. All right, let's move on to tip number 4 now. And tip number 4 is going to be.
All right. Yeah, I take some issue with his characterization here. I guess here's the deal. In comic books, you should never buy something that's boring. Let me say that again. If you're buying comic books, it should never be boring. If you're going back 2, 3, or 20 years, as he said, and that comic is worth the same as the hot new comic coming out, I wouldn't spend money on either. Investing in boring with regard to like comic books, people might say that, investing in a sure thing is boring. Well, how sexy is Amazing Fantasy 15 to you? That's pretty goddamn sexy if you ask me. And the idea is that for you and where you're going to spend your money, it should never be on something that you think is boring. Is like Amazing Spider-Man 14 with the Green Goblin. Is that boring to you? It's established. There's a history of return there. And comic book investing is inherently not boring, no matter what you're doing. And to me, it highlights another distinction that I want to bring out between investors and collectors. Listen, in every comic book investor, there's a little collector inside you screaming to get out. They're so glad you're spending a shitload of money on funny comic books. I mean, collectors buy what they like. They might buy an entire run of something, It's like, but as an investor, you can't think that way. You've got to, as an investor, you've got to be like, okay, I only have this amount of money. I don't want to spend a lifetime trying to collect an entire run of Amazing Spider-Man. Instead, I want to focus on individual books that might produce a return. It's like when I was a collector in the 80s, I mean, I bought the entire run of Elric of Melnibones. An investor would never do that. That was collector behavior. If you want to spend money on like Silver Age, Golden Age books, you've got to do so, but you got to keep, it's good to do so, but you got to keep your collector in check if you want to produce a return on that thing. Because the most important thing is not having the book. That's, for a collector, the most important thing is just having it. For an investor, the most important thing is making sure you get you can produce a return on whatever you're buying. So this particular rule about boring, it doesn't apply to comic books. Okay. On to number 4.
Low cost index funds are sensible for most investors. Low cost index funds are sensible for most investors. Okay, what do I mean by this? Well, for those who don't know, if you guys, I'm sure people who out there who are in the stock market understand what index funds are, but let me try to quickly explain. Index funds basically are groups and companies that basically they through algorithms and through analyzing the market, they basically hedge everything, and they buy, like, let's say they buy like just the top stocks of certain companies. So instead of like me saying I'm going to buy Apple, Amazon, Facebook, I can like invest in what is called an index fund, like a Vanguard index fund, and they'll just buy stuff for me that they've determined is, generally speaking, good returns. And so sometimes, like, to relate to the last point, those can be kind of boring and not as fun to go after, but usually, typically speaking, they have a better track record of growing slowly and steadily versus like picking the right hot company that grows massively, or having a miss on a random company that you invest in. So how does that relate to comic books here? If we're talking about index funds, well, I guess that would be something similar to the fact that, like, for most people, if we're talking about an investment, basically you're probably better off just getting, just blue chip certified books that, year after year, we just know are always going to have significance in the market. So, we're talking about first appearances of classic characters, whether they're from the Silver Age or the Bronze Age or Copper or whatever, just making sure that you're getting these books that have steadily grown over the years and are always going to have a cultural significance, versus chasing the very, very hottest, latest spec book, or going to Key Collector and seeing, oh, okay, what are the top 20 trending? Instead of chasing those things, just pick like a good classic Silver Age book that has, like, is a timeless comic that everybody loves. So I think that sort of tip would apply to, as far as growing your comic book equity and growing the value of your collection. Sticking to things that are tried and true are usually going to be more successful than going after hot stuff. All right, let us go on now to the last tip.
All right. So low-cost index funds are sensible for most investors. I think he's confused, honestly. First of all, let's talk about what an index fund is. An index fund, it also could be called an ETF. It's a fund that's meant to mirror the performance of a certain subset of stocks. So let's say that you wanted to focus on the Standard & Poor's index of the top 500 companies, but you don't want to buy them all individually. What you can do is that these companies will create index funds where all the companies in these top 500, they exist in the same proportions and are weighted differently based on the value of the stock itself. And you can throw $1,000 into that index fund, and two things happen. Number one, you essentially have a representation of all those stocks in that particular index fund for the value of $1,000. But the thing about it is that also the second thing is that you automatically have diversity. You've diversified your portfolio just by investing in an index fund, because it's diversified at least against, in that case, those 500 different companies. Just put $1,000 into an ETF, forget about it. There's no comic book equivalent to that. It's like if someone bought Action Comics 1, Detective Comics 27, like Amazing Fantasy 15, Showcase number 4, and provided an index of the performance of those groups of comics over time. First of all, I'd love to buy into that. I might only buy into that. Actually, that's bullshit. I wouldn't just buy it, and I'll explain why later. But what Mickey is describing is not index funds. He's describing like more well-known comics. It's more like how a company in the Dow Jones exchange performs versus the NASDAQ exchange. So Dow stocks are comprised of companies like Disney, Home Depot, Walmart. And these companies are like Action Comics 1, like Detective 27, Amazing Fantasy 15, versus like NASDAQ, which includes like some of the like, I would say more like the modern age books, like, you know, NVIDIA, Facebook, Google. The NASDAQ equivalent would be like Amazing Spider-Man 300, Uncanny X-Men number 266, Spawn 1 from McFarlane. So there's really no equivalent from a comic books. And so the distinction for you is that think of comic books like Silver Age and Golden Age more like the Dow Jones Exchange, and everything else to be more like on the NASDAQ. And then invest accordingly. Okay. On to the last one. Let's do this.
Of Warren Buffett's top 10 tips for investing in the stock market as I relate it to comic books. And that is going to be only listen to those you know and trust. Only listen to those you know and trust. All right. So what do I mean by that? Well, I think this one is pretty obvious. And that basically means this tip is basically, you know, Warren, you know, he has like personal people that he talks to. And generally speaking, he really only follows their advice when he decides on what to invest in. And, you know, or similarly, there are people who, you know, only invest in what Warren Buffett invests in because, you know, like this guy must know something. I trust him. He's made a lot of money. I'm just going to follow what he has to say. So, you know, as you guys watch this video and you guys think about what books to spec on and everything like that, you know, only spec on things that you yourself like and you know, if you're getting advice from other people in the community, only really listen to the people that you know and trust. And this includes me too. I mean, like, I'm just a guy, like I'm just, you know, I have my own opinions on stuff, and, you know, I'm not, don't listen to me all the time. Like, cause I'm not always right. Like, only pay attention to the people that you feel like are trustworthy in their, you know, tips and advice and their spec. And at the end of the day, be your own filter with all that information, because you never want to like spec on something because, you know, someone hyped you up on it and whatever, and you got excited and then you bought it and then you kind of regret that. I mean, that's like a really, really terrible feeling. So, you know, it's better that you are buying the things that, you know, you've thought about yourself and you really used your own filters and you prevented your FOMO. You decided that this is going to be the thing that I believe in, and go after those things. And then that way, if it doesn't hit, I mean, you won't feel bad about it, because you don't feel like you got, you know, swayed or you know, sold into chasing a spec book. It's something that you yourself felt like was a good purchase at the time. All right. Anyways, that is all I have for this video.
Okay. Only listen to those you know and trust. You know, here's the deal. If you trust Warren Buffett and you want to invest in comic books, you should not listen to him. You know, if you want to invest in cryptocurrency and you still trust Warren Buffett, you're not listening to him. You should really, in fact, here's the deal. You really should go into investing in comic books with the idea that it's not really a better investment than the stock market. Don't fool yourself. Or an index fund, for that matter. And you are doing this specifically because you're going to ignore the advice of people that you should trust, like Warren Buffett or Charlie Munger. And this is what I alluded to before. This is why you buy comic books. Because the counter to that is that you never get to hold a stock or an index fund in your hand. You never get to display them. You never have any fondness for stock that you might, you never really have any fondness for stock like you might for an extremely rare comic book. Listen, I've got a buddy of mine who's very critical of the fact that I spend money in comic books. This guy, has shitloads of Mike Trout cards. Pete Rose and Mike Trout. He just, you know, and he's holding on to them because he wants them. He's not ready to sell the NA because he loves them. I mean, he's a collector at heart. He's not really an investor in collectibles, but he also doesn't want to let them go for nothing. And, you know, you're here listening to me blather on about investing in comic books because you're probably, already decided, much like I have, that you're going to throw caution to the wind and use your hard-earned money to buy funny books to produce a return. And because you've chosen that ride, you might feel there's no one you feel you can listen to or will listen to you. And ultimately, that's why I created this channel. I created this channel to change that. Now, one postscript. Mickey says on his website that he is like an acclaimed director. And so if, he's got all these comic books over here, but here's the thing. Major flex here. See this golden statue over on the left? That's an Emmy, ladies and gentlemen. That's like the ultimate flex. Maybe the ultimate flex is like if it was an Oscar. I'm not going to criticize the dude for not having an Oscar. That's pretty badass to have like an Emmy in the background of like your YouTube videos. So that's a huge flex. I love that. Really glad he did this because, like I said, it really highlights for me how I look at investing differently, and you can take it or leave it for what you want. The last thing, I really want to build an amazing community. Wherever you're watching this, please like and subscribe. And I promise you, any fucking comment you guys write, good, bad, indifferent, whatever, I will respond to. Like, I'm doing this to help folks who love comic books and want to invest in comic books understand how important they are and can be as investments. I just want you to also be realistic in how you view them through the lens of an investor and not a collector. That's it, folks. Listen, thank you for watching. It's been an honor. It's been a pleasure. Enjoy the ride.